Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Have the stewards completely lost their mind at the Qatar Grand Prix? Massive drama today with a 10-second stop and go, a drive-through penalty. Penalties we haven't seen for years, it seems, in Formula 1, applied for situations that maybe did not quite merit them. Huge drama in terms of the Constructors' Championship, and massive drama too between Verstappen and George Russell, not just off the line, but after the Grand Prix as well. Verstappen with an absolute tirade against George Russell after the race, talking about how in private he's a very different person to who he is in public, and he has lost all respect for GR63 as a driver. Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Starting really with yesterday, because Max got a one-place penalty. So hang on a second. It was going to be a three-place, but then they said, oh well, Max couldn't really have done too much because there was a car like in front of him, which there was. And I mean, what is this precedence? That's the confusing thing. We talked about it yesterday. Russell comes up behind Verstappen very fast. Max is like, well, I don't have to get out of the way here. I'm on a slow lap. I know that George is on a slow lap as well. George then has to kind of like avoid the collision, but it was on some level a collision caused because Russell was going very quickly. Sure, could Verstappen have behaved differently? Maybe. But the argument now is, what precedent is this setting? If I'm on a slow lap, the guy in front of me is on a slow lap, if I just floor it and, you know, then brake and, you know what I mean, like pretend that he's got in my way and impeded me, then does he get a penalty? Like, I'm just confused. And also we got a penalty point for this, Max, which takes him over 40 penalty points, the most that's ever been accrued by any driver since the point system has come into play. So even before the day began, there were questions on what the hell the stewards are doing. And to be fair, the same was true even before the race began, because Perez and Piastri, both under investigation on the basically reconnaissance laps to the grid, and the testing laps done earlier when they came back into the pit lane, and, well, Piastri kind of cut up Hamilton basically, and Lewis was on the radio saying, look, Piastri is a bit dangerous, and they were under investigation for that already, which as a recording has still not yet been resolved. But this was the run into turn one. Max obviously was not happy about getting the drop from P1 to P2, so he decided to take it back immediately from George. Got a great start, got the inside line, and there was nothing Russell could do because he got forced out wide. Lando was the man, though, that could have taken advantage here, because he actually had a great line and basically did what Max did back in 2021, which is hug the inside line and gained a place by doing so. Honestly, he could have, if he wanted to, tried to challenge Max around the outside of this corner. This is basically going into the second turn, exactly how Leclerc got past Hamilton yesterday in the sprint. But Norris yielded here, which was, you know, an interesting decision. At the end of the day, had Norris tried to hold it around the outside, Max just would have forced him out of track. So, you know, I understand what Norris, you know, his decision here to just settle for second at the time, because also Norris's battle now is not with Max for the drivers, it's with Ferrari. And that's another reason why this stop-and-go penalty drama is just such a big deal. Meanwhile, though, at the first corner, there was already drama. Hülkenberg oversteered, basically understeered, actually. You know, he carried too much speed in. He caught Ocon. He caught Colapinto. They went out of the race. Hülkenberg actually could continue despite with a puncture. And I spotted this as the lights went out. But Hamilton false started. Now, his false start must have been incredibly marginal. He definitely does go slightly before the lights go out here. But the comparison immediately in my head was being made to what Lando did back in Jeddah. I think this was Jeddah, because it was the same thing in Jeddah that Lando did, and he got away with it then. And I think Perez did it a few weeks ago, and he got a 5-second penalty, but he just decided to carry on anyway and made up places, because this is why this rule is a bit controversial. I think it's probably fair to say, look, if you jump the gun, if you roll before the lights are fully out, then it's going to be a 5-second penalty. But of course, Hamilton goes, then he stops, then he goes again, and he loses like 3 places off the line as a result of this. So then he gets a 5-second pen on top. You can argue, if you're Hamilton, if you full start, just say, screw it, I'm going to send it anyway, and overtake 2, 3, 4 cars, and then say, oh, well, my bad, guess I got a 5-second pen. Although, knowing the stewards today, that would have been, you know, a 10-second stop-go or a drive-through. We'll get to that in the coming minutes because just so much drama today. So we've got plenty to discuss as always. Stroll was getting into some drama as always. Albon, of course, was not especially happy about it, and this was actually Zhou's POV of that drama. At this point, Zhou was in 15th place. That would change dramatically over the course of an eventful Grand Prix in Qatar. So the safety car comes out, of course, for the incident at turn 1. The restart happens. Max holds on to the lead. Piastri and Leclerc were battling super hard, because of course today it looked like McLaren were not necessarily going to win the Constructors, but basically put it out of reach for Ferrari in Abu Dhabi. That's not what happened due to, frankly, a catalogue of errors from, I would say, multiple departments. This was on lap 7 and it was immediately relatively clear there was going to be like no overtaking this race. I don't really know why they shortened the DRS zone by almost 200 meters, but they did, and it just killed most of the opportunities for racing at the front. I mean, there were still some good overtakes, and it's not like overtaking was impossible, but there were cars. Like Lando today was probably faster than Max. I mean, if you're following within 2 seconds for like the whole race, you are in a bit of dirty air at that point. You are probably faster than the car in front. But it was, Lando made a bit of progress sometimes. Then Max would either pull away. And as soon as Lando got into the dirty air with like a second and a half-ish, then he had no chance. And even getting to DRS, let alone trying to make an overtake, was basically impossible. So, Max definitely the deserving winner today. But Lando will be kind of frustrated the way that the race ended up playing out, especially because overtaking was just so challenging here. Max and Lando were basically trading fastest laps at the front of the field, and it looked like either one of those was going to win the race. And to be honest, at the end of the Grand Prix, we've seen this a few times this season when Max will be with Lando or faster or basically at the same pace as Lando at the start of the race, but at the end of the race on the lower fuel, that's when the McLaren can really come into its own. It kind of did that today again, actually, but obviously Lando was not in position to capitalise because of what happened during the race. So yeah, again, it was a 2-second gap really at the front. Russell was holding on to third. Piastri was trying to come past. That wasn't really going to be happening. And Hamilton tried to overtake Perez a few times. Nothing was really doing there. Leclerc was concerned about the tyre pressures. Gasly was in a good position. He was in 10th, and that got far better as time went on as well. But nothing really happened. The medium tyres were lasting longer than expected. People were expecting the one stop to be necessary by about this point. Everyone just kept on going, and Russell then decided to commit to it. Russell comes into the box, he executes the stop for the hards, and it's an absolutely disastrous stop. And it's a 7-second stop. They mess up the rear of the car, and Russell was down in 11th place after this stop with a hard tyre, which was not able to do anything. This was quite important for the race. Because of the bad stop, Russell got stuck behind Magnussen, Gasly and Alonso. Had he been ahead of Magnussen, would have been able to see what his true pace was. But in the dirty air of Alonso, he had no hope of an overtake, unfortunately, for Russell, and it kind of screwed up his race. Tsunoda started quite well, but then the RBs really did just completely fall off a cliff, and on the soft tyres, they were comically bad at the end of the race. But yeah, this was that moment a couple of laps earlier when Russell comes out the pit and ends up behind Alonso, which completely screws everything over. And Russell was on the radio saying the car isn't turning, at the same time that Hamilton was saying, actually, you know what, the car on slightly lower fuel actually is starting to give me a bit more front end. But and then the next lap, Hamilton dipped his rear tyres into the gravel here because he had a bit of understeer, and then it snapped to oversteer. So the problems in that W15 continue, and it's just an incredibly predictable weekend from Mercedes that they somehow go from dominating Vegas, winning every single session, like leading FP1, FP2, FP3, winning every qualifying session, dominating the race 1-2, lead every lap, whatever. But no, that wasn't enough, it seems, to mean that they're going to be any good in Qatar, because they're a pretty disastrous day today. Now, this was a wing mirror. I think it was from Hülkenberg's car, maybe, that fell onto the track. And this was the start of the series of events that caused chaos in the second half of this Grand Prix. So this was right in the middle of the straight, exactly where you want to be if you are either making an overtaking move into turn 1, or if you were trying to, let's say, cool your engine or your tyres by pulling out of the slipstream of the car in front. So this had to be removed. I think there was no doubt in my mind they had to get rid of this, because someone was going to run over it. If it stayed where it was, there was going to be something that happened from then to the end of the race. Now, initially, they yellow flagged this. I think they put double yellows out. But obviously, that wasn't sustainable, right? At some points, they had to decide, okay, is this fine, or are we going to throw a VSC? That would have been the solution. Throw the VSC, slow the cars down, someone runs onto the track, picks it up, gets out of there, and it's okay. But no, that wasn't the initial solution. They just let it sit there for lap after lap. Now, the drama was about to hit because Lando had closed into 1.3 behind Max. I thought, wow, Lando's really pushing now to try and take the race win in the later part of this medium tyre stint. But actually, no, he'd gained that time because he hadn't slowed down under the yellow flags. Max came on the radio because he knew that Lando was closer to him than he should have been and said, hey, can you just check that Lando slowed down for those yellows? And it turned out that he didn't. He went past the solid yellow line completely flat out. Now, this is a slam dunk penalty. Sure, should they have moved the thing earlier, or they should have done something about it? Yeah, and we're going to discuss the FIA for what they were doing there in a second, because that was a joke. But at the same time, this is a clear penalty for Lando, and the precedent would probably have been what we've seen in the past. This could be a 10-second penalty, could be a 5-second penalty. You guys know, I like fair penalties, and I actually very much like harsh penalties. I'm not opposed at all to stop-and-go penalties, to drive-through penalties, coming back into our sport. I think it is for the better, because you want to ensure that the penalty is harsher than the actual activity itself, because then it discourages doing said activity. I want the same thing for racing maneuvers that could be deemed to be dangerous. And for example, what Max did to Lando back in Mexico, pushing him off the track at turn 8, to me, that should have been a drive-through or a stop-and-go penalty. You want to very much discourage that type of dangerous driving, in my opinion, as I believe that it was. So I'm down for stop-and-go penalties. I just think it's remarkable how we come into this weekend, no real discussion around tightening up and harshening penalties, and yet we get stuff like this. I mean, I'm kind of down for it, but I'm like, wow, this doesn't seem fair on some level. Now look, should this be a penalty? Yes. Is it dangerous to go full speed through a double wave yellow or whatever? Yes. And should Lando be penalised? Yes, I agree. But the level of the penalisation I thought was absolutely remarkable. And I know that they've changed race director, but it's the stewards that make these calls. And I know the stewards department, like, again, different guys in the stewards room this week to last weekend's, but it shouldn't be this much different, you'd think. And then here's Valtteri Bottas, obviously pulls out of the slipstream. I don't really know, maybe he thinks he's trying to defend from Leclerc here, but he runs straight over this wing mirror and throws loads of debris all over the circuit, and within the next couple of corners, Sainz then gets a puncture on his front left. I think there was a bit of debris therefore that flew over to the left-hand side of the track. Sainz got a front left puncture, Hamilton got a front left puncture, and both of their races at this point were effectively ruined. And it was like, this should not be acceptable at all. Like, Lando getting the penalty, fine. But the fact that they did nothing about this bit of debris in the center of the track, eventually someone was going to run over it, causing more debris. And then there was 2 punches that ruins both of those guys' races. And then the safety car came out, obviously, because I've got to clean this whole thing up. So Hamilton comes into the pits. He says, I can't believe I've got this bad luck. Obviously, you only lose 15 or so seconds under the safety car when you box. So that massively helped out Verstappen, Norris, and Leclerc. But Hamilton lost about a minute of lap time getting back to the pits, because obviously the puncture happened at the start of the lap, right? So he had to go all the way around again, loses so much time, ends up at the back of the field, basically. And the safety car goes on, they're bringing the cars through the pit lane, right? Because you've got to come through the pits in order to avoid what they're trying to clean up at turn 1. And during this whole saga, Hamilton obviously is a bit pissed off. He comes into the pits, forgets to put the limiter on, speeds going into the pit lane. And Lando has to slam on the brakes. He locks up a little bit and he says, oh, Lewis probably missed his pit limiter, basically. And as a result, he says Hamilton should get a penalty, which he does. And I expected the penalty to be 5 seconds, 10 seconds, something like that. I thought would have been, let's say, consistent with what we've seen in the past. It's a penalty. If you speed in the pit lane, it's a penalty. No doubt about it. If you go through a double waved yellow, it's a penalty. No doubt about it. But a 10-second stop and go. I think many people saw the 10-second stop go for Lando, which hadn't actually been applied yet, and they thought, oh, it's a 10 seconds. But then it was like, no, it's a 10-second stop and go, which is worse than even a drive-through. And Hamilton gets a drive-through for this. So, yeah, I couldn't really believe it, actually. The racing gets back underway, and it was an interesting race restart because the safety car lights didn't kind of go off properly. Max was super squiggly on the rear end going through the final corner, and Lando had a good chance even to take the lead of the race at this point, but of course Max just basically shuffles him wide, and he would have been shuffled off the track had he not yielded. So Lando slots into second. There was drama in the back though, Leclerc on Piastri. But then there was more contact. Hulkenberg goes off the road. He's out of the race. And then during this next safety car period, Perez just loses the car. The rear end goes, he spins out, and then he tries to get going again and it doesn't work and he's out of the race. Now, I want to give Perez the benefit of the doubt here that he didn't just lose it of his own accord. It sounded like what happened was the same thing that happened to him, if you guys remember, Bahrain 2022, the first event, the first race of this new Grand Effect era, when at the end of the race, both Red Bulls retired, and Perez had that retirement into turn 1. When he goes into turn 1, he puts the power down, the rears just lock up and he spins the car around. And I want to say that's what happened again to Perez here. So interesting to see these problems still occurring to the Red Bull, because he does get the car going again, but he's out of the race. And it's not like Perez was having a bad race by his standards. He was actually on course to score some points, which is good for Perez lately. But yeah, that was a disaster. He then rejoined the track unsafely, apparently. Apparently that was dangerous driving. So he may be given a penalty, Perez, for the next race in Abu Dhabi, which would be a double whammy of a disaster. And then Piastri's still being investigated for the pit entry stuff pre-race. So the stewards have been so busy, and the race director, of course, the same guy who race directed Formula 2 earlier in the day, because they fired the F2 race director just a couple of days ago. Shout out Mohammed Ben Sulayem, keeping everything in good shape as always. So then the next restart happens, Hamilton has to serve his drive-through penalty, and Hamilton comes into the pits and basically said, like, guys, can I just retire the car? I can't be bothered anymore. And I don't blame it, right? I mean, we know that Hamilton's pretty demotivated by the circumstances at Mercedes, and then just everything that could go wrong on the day goes wrong for him on the day. Obviously, a fair bit of it is his fault, but yeah, just a shambles, really. And I thought Hamilton was going to come in and say, you know what, guys, I've had enough of this. And he actually threatened, I think, on the radio just to come in and turn off the car and said, park the car, retire the car. But he's like, no, we can't do that, because if he comes in for the stop-go, or he comes in for the drive-through and stops the car, then it's like, you've not served it, so you've then got to serve it next race, which that's a problem. So Hamilton did do it, and then I think they told him, all right, Lewis, if you do want to retire the car, you can just come in and retire the car. And then he decided, you know what, actually no, I am going to grind out. And basically Hamilton then drove a pretty damn good race at that point onwards. He was flying over the last few laps, but not as much as Lando Norris was, because a couple of laps later we then got this confirmation of Lando Norris getting a 10-second stop-go penalty, like one of the harshest penalties I've seen in the last decade of Formula 1. And it happens for Lando. Okay, dangerous, sure, driving in the way that he did through the double waved yellow, but it's like, wow, something like this for that, given what we've seen over the last couple of years and couple of races, just seems remarkably inconsistent, I would argue. So Norris then is right at the back of the pack. I mean, look at this. He was 17 seconds behind Lawson at this point, and because he lost 38 seconds in the stop-go penalty, 10-second penalty would have been bad. That would have sent him, way down the order. But this struck me as kind of remarkable. And you could also be forgiven for thinking that this was deliberate to make the championship battle more interesting, right? I know that there will be people this evening making that read and saying, well, they've done this deliberately to mean that Ferrari score more points and make the constructors' battle more interesting. I don't want to say that, but it's convenient, isn't it? That these are the, and obviously after Lando gets this one, then Hamilton then gets his drive-through, and yeah, it's all going on at this point. Hamilton drops to the back of the field, obviously, because at this point he was on the hard tyre, but then the soft tyre massively fell off. Hamilton made progress. Norris was flying though at this point in the race as well, and to be fair to him, actually did secure the fastest lap as well at the end. And Hamilton, to be fair, was also making some moves. He got past Tsunoda, got past Lawson, got up into 12th place. The real star of the show, though, in many respects today, of course, was none other than Zhou Guanyu. What a performance from him. We've talked about the Saubers now for the last couple of weeks. They've brought some upgrades. They've delivered what they wanted to deliver. And all of a sudden, they're now a reasonably competitive midfield-looking car. And fair play. Zhou's capitalised well. Him to come home with 4 points today, I thought was mega for him, given that he's probably not going to overdrive in Formula 1 again. So I thought that was great to see. But Norris ends up 10th place with the fastest lap. Verstappen wins the Grand Prix. Incredibly controlled drive from him. Takes the lead off the line. Executes incredibly well. Piastri was very close to catching Leclerc, but Leclerc gets second place. Mega for Ferrari. Sainz, after his puncture, probably should have got Gasly for at least 5th, didn't. So that's a couple of points that went away. But wow, what a drive from Gasly too. I mean, I talk about Zhou being the star of the show, but Gasly in 5th in the Alpine is a mega showing, really, honestly, you've got to say. Alonso in 7th, good points for them. Magnussen gets a couple as well. So Lando after the race said it was a fair penalty, but he still seemed a bit confused as to exactly where that all came from. But we've got to talk about, before we close out the video here, obviously, that big drama we said at the start about George Russell and Max Verstappen, because the one place race penalty for Verstappen was quite confusing, and it was confusing as to exactly how they came to that conclusion. So Verstappen post-race today just went on an absolute tirade against George Russell and said the way the other driver, as in George, handled things during the stewards meeting yesterday, honestly, that made no sense. I think I have a lot of respect for other drivers, but after last night, I've definitely lost respect for him. I just found it ridiculous how he tried to push me to get a penalty. I was really pissed at him for that. And he went on to say even this: I don't want to talk about it with Russell. He always acts extremely polite in front of the cameras, but if you sit together with him personally, he's a completely different person. I truly can't stand that. Then you might as well F off. I don't want anything to do with you. So, wow. I mean, like, Max is going up on the main stage. I've been to the stewards many a time. I've never seen a driver try so hard to screw another driver, which, you know, let's be honest. Does that sound like a George Russell thing to do? Absolutely, as far as I'm concerned. And Max said happy about it. And of course, Max had therefore decided that he was absolutely in no way at all going to allow Russell to maintain the lead going into turn one, and in the end Russell finishes off the podium. So Max is going to talk all his trash, and fair play, but wow, what an eventful day, literally from start to finish. And even this to finish off with, rumour has it that was Ocon's last Grand Prix, and Jack Doohan's taken over in Abu Dhabi. So I'll just leave you with that bombshell, but very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.